My name is LJ Stambuk, and I'm the President and CEO of the World Affairs Council of Charlotte. I'm delighted to have here today in Charlotte His Excellency Ambassador of Canada to the U.S., Gary Doer. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you the Mayor of the City of Charlotte, Anthony Fox. Mayor.
Thank you very much, and it's always a pleasure to join the World Affairs Council for wonderful events like this that help us re-engage and revitalize and refresh our recollections and our understanding of how we fit into the global economy. Today, we share a very special opportunity to welcome the Canadian Ambassador, Mr. Gary Doer, and we welcome you to Charlotte. You've been here before. He told me that he was here during the Democratic Convention, and he's actually been here even before then. And you're going to hear today about some of the wonderful economic partnerships that exist today and some that can exist today as our countries continue to build on the wonderful partnership that we have. As Mayor of Charlotte, it's always a pleasure for me to welcome our international guests with a gift. And Mr. Ambassador, if you wouldn't mind coming forward here, I would love to give you what many people in Charlotte already know about, which is a Beckler Museum wonderful book that will show you the contents of this museum. I hope you get a chance to visit it someday. It is one of our newest arts facilities in the city. It is signed by Andreas Beckler, who is the namesake of this wonderful place, and we hope that you have many great trips to Charlotte. And frankly, if you want to open up an office here, we'll be glad to have it. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
It is my pleasure to greet the sponsor, the title sponsor of this program today, Elliott Davis. It's a great company. If you want to learn about it, we have about 15 to 20 people from Elliott Davis here today. Do talk to them. They do wonderful work, and we're very happy to have them in Charlotte. I would also like to thank the Consul General of Canada, Atlanta, who is a co-sponsor of this event today. Among us today, we have Laura Mayer-Wellman, Honorary French Consul. Laura? Thank you for coming. Catherine Hansen, Chief of Protocol, City of Charlotte. Catherine? She just left with the mayor. She'll be back. We also have Tom Murray, Charlotte Regional Visitors Authority new CEO, and you should all talk to him. A great addition to our city. And also, someone you all know, Jennifer Roberts, the former chair of the County Commission, and the predecessor Executive Director of the World Affairs Council before me. As always, we have a lot of students. I'm delighted to call on and introduce to you the students from Charlotte Country Day School. You can stand up. Thank you for coming. Students from the Cannon School, please stand up. Thank you for coming. And students from Providence Day School. Thank you all for coming. Now, briefly enjoy your lunch, and we'll start with the program at 12:15. Again, we're delighted to have His Excellency, the Ambassador of Canada, Gary Doer, here with us. I got a call from the President and the Chairman of the National World Affairs Councils of America, and she told me, you have one of the best speakers that you can have among the diplomatic corps coming down to you in Charlotte. So having said that, I would like to introduce to you Kay Biskopnik, and she's international tax shareholder at Elliott Davis. Kay?
Welcome everyone. It's my privilege to introduce the ambassador. In October 2009, Gary Doer assumed his responsibilities as Canada's 23rd representative to the United States of America. Prior to taking up his current position in Washington, Ambassador Doer served as Premier of Manitoba for 10 years. During that time, he worked extensively with U.S. governors to enhance Canada-U.S. cooperation in trade, agriculture, water protection, climate change, and renewable energy. Ambassador Doer won 3 consecutive elections as Premier of Manitoba, was successfully increasing majorities. At this time, I would like to introduce Ambassador Doer.
Well, thank you very much, Kay, and I apologize for the change in the program, but unfortunately I have to go from here to Calgary for a funeral from an old friend who passed away this week, and going from here to Calgary, I got to go to Houston and then Calgary. So I've learned from your tourism branch 2 things about that. One, we need more direct flights from Charlotte to Canada, and 2, it's closer from Charlotte to Frankfurt than it is to go to our beautiful city of Calgary. I want to thank the World Affairs Council and all of their work here for this meeting. It is extremely positive for us, and we've had great meetings set up by your president, your chief executive officer, who's been wonderful to work with. We certainly know that this adds a real dimension to our outreach. I also want to thank the mayor. The mayor never stops selling Charlotte. He was mentioning a better presence here. Of course, we have Steve Brereton from Atlanta, but he, of course, wants to go further than that. But I have invited the mayor to Canada, and I want to make sure that he's joined by all of you to come to Canada on a delegation from this beautiful part of the world, the beautiful part of the United States, Charlotte, and its communities surrounding it. And we'll just say to you, stay tuned to find out when that trip is going, because the mayor has promised to visit us in Canada. We also want to thank you for the tremendous hospitality during the Democratic Convention. All the ambassadors, because we're nonpartisan, went to both the Republican Convention and the Democratic Convention. And I know, speaking on behalf of all of my colleagues, that we had a wonderful time in Charlotte, not only with the convention itself, but the community did not feel like it was an armed camp. People were able to go to meals and have a beer and visit people, the art galleries and other great facilities in this community. And for all of you that were part of that host committee and all of you that worked on hosting that convention, congratulations. I thought it was one of the best political convention venues I've ever been to. And as a person who's been involved in politics for a long time, I've been to a lot of conventions. And it was very, very great to be there. Now, the Canadian ambassador has a fairly easy job right now in the United States to explain our great friendship and our great relationship with the United States. I could actually hand out wine or sandwiches or meals and receptions, but if any of you have watched the movie Argo, have you watched the movie Argo? You get one Hollywood movie with a bit of a reference to a Canadian ambassador and the CIA and getting those American diplomats out of Tehran. You get one Hollywood movie that gets an Academy Award. Doesn't matter how many speeches I make, it doesn't matter how many free drinks I pour. I tell you, get Hollywood on your side. You can't lose as an ambassador. So I want to thank all our friends that produced Argo. Thank you very, very much, Ben Affleck. I've also got a connection to Charlotte from my past. I was Crown Royal is produced in my home province of Manitoba. And Crown Royal, of course, is a Canadian whiskey. And Governor Perry was giving me a rough time about the fact that Canada bought more Slurpees per capita than any other country in the world. But we actually happen to know that Texas bought more Crown Royal than any other state in the United States. Now, why is that important to Charlotte? One of the NASCAR cars has got a Crown Royal bumper and label on it. And I know from the Crown Royal executives, they got more attention to the fact that they were sponsoring a NASCAR car than anything they else did in advertising. The other message about Crown Royal that goes to Texas, it is easier to put Crown Royal in a pipeline from Canada to Texas than it is to put oil. So what can I say? What can I say about that? We'll keep working on it. I mention Argo because ever since the War of 1812, which of course we both claim we won, and of course we know in Canada that we did win that War of 1812, but ever since that war, Canada and United States have been allies working together, losing lives together, losing limbs together, fighting for the democratic values that we cherish here in Charlotte, here in North Carolina, and obviously in Canada. And whether it was World War I or World War II or the Korean War or the war that we're presently together in, a soldier from Fort Bragg is with a soldier from 2PPCLI in Canada in Afghanistan today, and we work together as allies. And over the last couple of years, it's been very, very uncertain in very many places around the world. It continues to be a very uncertain area and terrain in some of our countries. I got asked a question on the radio today about North Korea and its provocations and what that will mean for the security of the Asia-Pacific region. We work together in Egypt. We work together in Tunisia. We work together as allies in Libya to have American assets and Canadian assets work together to have regime change that did not have innocent people in Benghazi and other places that could be slaughtered by Gaddafi when he threatened to do so some 18 months ago. And as we speak, and we are working together in Syria, working together with sanctions, trying to figure out what is the best course forward, worried about what will happen to chemical weapons with the people of Syria, worried about what will happen to chemical weapons if there is a regime change in Syria and what it will mean for security and safety of people in the region. What can we do on a humanitarian basis? What can we do with refugees and those refugee camps? And some really, really tough issues are who really are the allies who really are the so-called rebels in Syria or the opposition in Syria to the Assad regime, and what will it mean after there is a change in that country for the stability of the region and for the security of the people that will be returning from camps to Syria. And of course, the other major world issue that we're dealing with is another issue in the Middle East, and that is, of course, what are we going to do together on the situation in Iran? We know that Iran is building up its nuclear capacity. We know that they're building the capacity to potentially build a nuclear weapon. We are using all the sanctions that we can muster in Canada and the United States and in France and in Europe to try to make sure that the negotiations to contain and prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon are put in place successfully. But I want to assure you in this room that the United States and Canada have the same view and position on Iran obtaining a nuclear weapon. And our position is the same because we both believe that it would be a huge error to allow for a strategy of containment after Iran obtains a nuclear weapon. The only way to go is to negotiate a solution, a peaceful solution, or as the President of the United States has stated and our Prime Minister has stated, all other options, including military options, are on the table to prevent Iran from arming itself with a nuclear weapon. So when we talk about the relationship between Canada and the United States, a lot of issues are domestic and a lot of issues are in the news, but when the President and the Prime Minister meet together in the Oval Office or they meet together in the Prime Minister's office in Ottawa, they're dealing with security issues, they're dealing with safety issues, they're dealing as allies together on how best to move forward in very, very difficult situations. And I wanted to make sure that you knew that in terms of the United States, because the United States is not alone when it's confronting very dangerous regimes. The United States is not alone when it's confronting very dangerous potential threats to our two countries and to our other allies in Europe and around the world. And I wanted to pledge again our support at the World Affairs Council for that continued relationship that is so very, very important to our two countries. In terms of partnership, Canada has a great trading partnership with the United States and has a great energy partnership with the United States. We buy more goods from North Carolina than Japan, China, and Mexico put together. We in Canada buy more goods from the United States than the whole European Union put together. So sometimes when people are talking about trade missions to China or another country, we say it's only a 9-iron from Charlotte to Canada. We're just up there a little bit. If you don't like snow, come in a few more weeks. And it would make a lot of difference for your businesses, for your educational programs, for your energy ideas and innovations, and for government-to-government relationships in terms of opening doors in terms of trade. We want to continue to build upon the strengths of North Carolina and the strengths of Canada, the banking sector, the energy sector, the healthcare sectors, the whole issues of the educational excellence that's in this state, the tourism potentials. We think a lot of people that go down I-95 are making a mistake by not going to Asheville, not going to Charlotte, not going to NASCAR, not going to the Outer Banks. And so we've got a job to do, Mr. Tourism Director, to continue to get more Canadians experiencing this beautiful part of the world. We also believe that all of this adds jobs and economic development. And we want to continue to work with all of you to make sure the doors are open to business. Canada wants reciprocity of trade. We want rules of law in trade. We're working with the United States and the Pacific region to make sure the trade rules that we believe in are brought into the Trans-Pacific Partnership new trade agreement. And we will continue to be an ally, too, at the table against distorted currencies and trade practices that don't provide for the protection of rule of law. In terms of energy, we believe that the United States and Canada can reach our climate change priorities and reduce greenhouse gases, as we both pledged to do, by 17% by the year 2020. And we can have energy independence in North America from the Middle East and energy independence from reliability on crude oil coming from Venezuela. Now, how do we do that? Number one is energy efficiency, and Canada and the United States have aligned themselves together on light vehicle emission standards, which is radically reducing emissions into the atmosphere and has the added benefit of selling more cars that are produced in this North American market. Secondly, we believe in renewables. Canada has 63% of our electricity produced by renewable energy, 63%. And we know that you have a great energy center here in Charlotte, and we want to work with you to continue to improve the renewables in Canada and in the United States. We also believe that shale gas represents a huge game changer to the United States. And we see that both in terms of cleaner air and more energy reliability and affordability in the United States, with the return of more manufacturing that has been outsourced to the United States, to Canada, and to North America in terms of a future with this energy. And finally, we believe in oil being developed in the United States, oil being developed potentially again in Mexico, and oil being utilized from Canada to be part of energy independence in North America. We know that 1,000 companies in the United States provide supplies and innovation to the oil sands in Canada. They're not building upgraders in Algeria. They're not building refineries in Saudi Arabia. We're doing it on the Gulf Coast. We're doing it, we're developing innovations in the Bakken oil field. We're building projects in Alberta and in Saskatchewan and in offshore in Hibernia. So we very much believe that this is not just an energy independence strategy, but it's an economic strategy in terms of creating jobs. Jobs that don't rely on government funding, but are rather generated through the private sector. Tough budgets to hear. Tough budgets in states, cities, and at the federal government. Tough budgets in Canada. And so we think we should move ahead in a meaningful way with projects that will make us energy independent. It's been talked about since Richard Nixon was President of the United States. We no longer have to talk. We have to be doers and get this done. We can get it done by approving a lot of projects that are sitting to be taken, really, in Canada and the United States. So when we talk about Keystone Pipeline, which has got a little bit of media attention here in the United States and creates lots of difficulty on the political side, because people say, which side are you on? Are you for the climate change and cleaner air and cleaner water? Or are you on the side of energy? You actually can be on the side of both. You can have cleaner air by having energy efficiency in cars, as the President has done and as the Prime Minister has done. And you can have energy independence, which creates more economic employment and guarantees greater environmental protection in countries like Canada and the United States to believe in the balance between environmental law and economic development. So we therefore believe, obviously, that the Keystone Pipeline should be approved. And I want to thank Senator Hagan and Senator Burr for voting for that just recently in the Senate. I know there's a lot of pressure and noise about voting for it, but in the long run, over 65% of Americans have figured it out. You want your oil from, Iraq or Iran or other countries, you want it from Canada. You want your oil from North Dakota or Montana, or you want it from Venezuela. It's not that complicated as far as I'm concerned, but maybe I've missed something. And we want to continue to work with you to have energy independence, because energy independence, as the governor of Montana said, he doesn't send his National Guard to Fort McMurray to lose their lives, or he doesn't send his National Guard to Edmonton. They're losing their lives and limbs in situations in the Middle East that we can do something about with an energy strategy in Canada. We will continue to work as neighbors for cleaner air and cleaner water. We look forward to working with you on the Arctic region. We share 3 oceans, the Pacific, the Atlantic, and the Arctic. When you come to Canada, bring a parka, see the polar bears. Do not hand a polar bear a Coca-Cola. They're cuddly, but they will eat you. We welcome you to our country. And again, we want to thank you for your friendship, for your trade, for your partnership, and for your time here today at lunch. Thank you very, very much. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Before we shuttle the ambassador off to the airport, which is going to happen in about 10 to 15 minutes, we do have time for some questions. So I'm Mike Hawley, by the way, member of the board of the World Affairs Council, and would love for you to raise your hands and ask any questions that you have. Oh, there's a mic there too if you want to, but we don't have to stand on formality. Yes, ma'am, please.
We do have to stand on this. This makes it easier.
Okay. I just want to acknowledge what a wonderful neighbor you are, what a wonderful ally Canada is. And I wondered if you would speak to the guest worker program that's been instituted, speak of energy in Western Canada using or recruiting area ex-servicemen, and about how many people are involved in that now and how successful that program is.
The guest worker program and and service personnel?
Exactly, yes. U.S. service personnel.
Yes, well, we have worked with the building trades and the oil industry to have a program called Helmets to Hard Hats. We've adopted it in both Canada and in the United States. It doesn't get a lot of publicity, unfortunately, but there's a pledge in both our countries to train and hire returning military personnel from both our countries from Afghanistan as we transition out in 2014 into those jobs, into many of those jobs in the building trades, and that's why we've got agreement from the building trades unions and the pipe fitters and the other skilled labor areas to be part of the training. It's interesting, you know, just a couple of weeks ago, there was a protest at the White House where 24 people were arrested. At the same day, the building trades and the military had a press conference to hire thousands of workers to work on the pipeline and to work on energy. Not just our pipeline, but other pipelines in the United States that need to be rebuilt. Some of the pipelines, the latest spill in Arkansas is 65 years old. Some of that infrastructure has to be rebuilt. And so we very much believe that people coming back from military service should be trained and hired in both our countries, and we're glad we have the support of industry, we're glad we have the support of the unions, and we can do it. And that's a program I think worth fighting for.
Lumir, you may want to just walk around with that mic in case folks would prefer. I see Rodney Pitts heading. Hopefully, you're not going out the door. There he is. He's going to the microphone.
Right.
Rodney Pitts.
Ambassador, we're delighted to have you here. If you could give us a little more detail on where the Keystone Pipeline stands at this point in time. As a businessman, I understand the need to diversify markets, diversify customers, and therefore China obviously becomes a potential market, probably already is a market, I'm almost sure, for Canadian oil. Where does that piece of this stand? The way I look at it as someone from the outside, Canada is being incredibly patient with the United States. Could you comment on that?
Well, we respect the fact that the president had the governor of Nebraska wanting a new route that the State Department had approved through the Sandhill portion of the aquifer. We were disappointed it was not evaluated as in the national interest of the United States until that route was amended. We thought we could do both together. But having said that, we're pleased now that Nebraska has agreed to the amended route, so we now have North Dakota, Montana, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas all agreeing to it. We therefore think that the State Department's report that just came out a couple of weeks ago basically says that this project will have no difference for greenhouse gases because Canada has other markets. We do. The biggest demand in the world for oil and for coal and for every other commodity is in China. The second biggest area of demand is India. And so, but we also are in the Middle East with you. So it does make sense for us to have energy security in our neighborhood. We don't see it just as a silo, we see it as a bigger picture. So we would prefer to keep working with our best customer, and we see it together. We think the State Department also says that the oil will come down by train. And so trains actually have higher GHGs than pipelines. But we really believe that the report that the State Department issued was honest, accurate in the facts, provided science to make the decision. Americans should be satisfied. They need the oil. The manufacturing jobs to produce materials for that oil being developed in North Dakota, Montana, and Canada will be a lot in the United States and in Canada. That the pipelines are safe. The new pipelines, by the way, are 40 feet below the rivers. The Yellowstone River that had problems a couple years ago, on the riverbed. The new pipelines are actually 40 feet below them. So we think the science dictates going ahead. And we think there's lots of issues of climate change. We don't think this is one of them. We think the State Department was accurate in saying that. As I said, we think that we could do both. But it's got caught up in, the narrative in Washington is tougher than the narrative outside of Washington. It's, you know, it is much tougher. It's kind of interesting. I have to tell you a story. I was in Copenhagen when the President and the Prime Minister agreed to new climate change rules. And a Hollywood actress whose name I will not repeat here today, but she did play the part of a mermaid in a movie years ago, said, "I've weaned myself completely off of all of fossil fuels." Which begs the question, how long is that kayak ride from Malibu to Copenhagen? And did she use the Northwest Passage or go through the Panama Canal? So I think we want to have a little bit of reality check on people that say one thing, and because the world requires you to fly in an airplane, and don't fly in an airplane with solar power at night, we want to do more on renewables, but we also want to be realistic on traditional fuels. The answer to your question is, if it's based on science, it goes ahead. If it's based on noise, I can't predict it.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've got a student coming to queue up. Please. Ambassador, you spoke last night, and maybe you can just briefly summarize for us, comparing and contrasting how we go about resolving major conflicts here in the U.S. versus how you do it in Canada. Could you give us just in 30 seconds or less?
Well, in our system, if you vote against the budget, you have an election. In your system, you can vote against the budget and then vote against another budget, maybe vote against another budget. So it's a harder system. You've got checks and balances in your system. Our system is you're in government and we'll defeat you if we don't like what you do. And if the opposition defeats you, then we get to decide whether we want to keep you or replace you. So that's one difference. You see that with the Cameron government in the UK. He's bringing in budgets. In a minority government, he has to have the support of another party. Your system works very well in checks and balances, but doesn't sometimes work well for getting a budget passed. That's pretty tough.
Please, sir.
Hello. You mentioned the use of shale gas, which has been newly discovered and has increased in the recent years. What is your opinion on hydrofracking and the effects it has on the environment?
Well, we do believe that you need to develop rules that give the protection to the water table, and not only the give it, but are perceived to be giving it as part of the regulatory environment. And in Canada, we've been doing fracking for a few years, and we're trying to share some of that safety and innovation with some of the American states and companies that are proceeding with it. We think that it can be done safely. I listened to Governor Hickenlooper from Colorado a few months ago. There's a debate in Colorado about fracking. He's a geologist, so he can take whatever a pundit says and actually go through it point by point. He is trying to come to an agreement with both industry and people concerned about water. I think that's smart to do, and I think that it can be done safely. Canada believes it can be done safely, but it can't be done. You cannot cut any corners when it comes to protecting the water table. Water is precious on both sides of the border, and it's got to be protected as part of the fracking. And it can be, in our view.
And we're going to save the last question for Jennifer Watson-Roberts.
Can you give us an update on some of the security concerns as well as some of the commercial opportunities and Canada's role in that right now in the Northwest Passage? Thanks.
Well, first of all, Canada and the United States are chairing the Arctic Council for the next 4 years. We have a cabinet minister from Nunavut who is our chair, and that's good because she actually knows what the people in the circumpolar region of the world are thinking. One of the last things we want to do is have somebody, say in Winnipeg, you know, driving around in a Volvo telling people in the north what they should do. And no disrespect to anybody driving a Volvo. I better be careful. They don't make it in France, like they're Michelin tire. I got to be careful of all the. We have real opportunity and real challenges. The ice is melting. The Northwest Passage, where I would come from in Churchill, the polar bears are coming off the ice earlier. In fact, I'll give you an example of that. They're coming off so early that polar bears, when they're walking through town, we tranquilize them. When we tranquilize them, we put them in a polar bear jail. You couldn't make this up. And until the ice reforms so they can go back and eat the seals, which they eat, we've had to put air conditioning in the jail in Churchill. And so it's because they're coming off the ice in July. On the geopolitical issue, we're trying to work together with the United States on environmental mitigation, environmental capacity in the north, defense. We share missions together every year through the Northwest Passage, Canada and U.S. ships. We want to work with the Arctic Council to get good plans in place. We've got now a plan on search and rescue. On the border in the Arctic Ocean, the issues of sovereignty, the U.S. on the Northwest Passage has a view. They treat the Northwest Passage the same way as they treat the South China Sea, the same way as they treat the Straits of Hormuz, that all waterways are international waterways. But they look at it beyond the Northwest Passage. Canada believes that the Northwest Passage is Canadian sovereignty, sovereign Canadian territory. So we've agreed to disagree. Even though we're sharing ships and missions together in NORAD, protecting that whole region. There is one dispute. We share 3 oceans together. The Baffin or the Beaufort Sea is we have a disagreement. Secretary Clinton and our foreign minister agreed to have a group of experts try to arbitrate that. Canada is a signatory to the Treaty of the Sea by the UN. The United States isn't, so we're trying to figure out a bilateral way to use experts to resolve a dispute before people identify who's going to win and lose with the resources in that wonderful area. So that's how we're trying to resolve it. We're not North Korea, we're Canada. We're north of you, but we're your friends and allies. And again, Mike could be a great chair of any meeting. I would not want to be a student in his former classes and come in there after I had a few beer in Charlotte and have him ask questions, because he will not let you rest. He'll get you right away. He's a great chair, and I want to thank him for last night and tonight. Thank you very much.
And I'm going to prove that point by, we've got 1 minute left. Tell them quickly about the polar bear's adaptive behavior in Churchill to all of the darting that goes on up there.
Okay, in Churchill, they used to shoot the bears before they ate the people. Just a fundamental rule. And now we tranquilize the bears before they eat the people. The conservation officers go out in helicopters and they find the bears and they tranquilize them, how do I say it diplomatically, in the butt. Is that okay? I can say that, in the butt. The recidivist bears, the next year, when they hear a helicopter hovering over top of them, they sit down because they know they're going to get shot in the butt again and end up in polar bear jail. That's how animals adapt. It's wonderful to see. Thanks for that question. Thank you.
So, okay, so if you all will just stay seated and keep enjoying company, we're going to let the ambassador go with Rob and Steve to the airport. So as he is leaving, let's give him a great round of applause. Thank you.